That is the exact play we freaking drew up. We literally drew up. And so being in Indiana, everything is on full microscope times a million. And like
when Caitlin Clark released that three-pointer from 31 feet with 1.2 seconds remaining, the basketball world stopped. The Indiana Fever were down 1 point. Washington had just taken the lead on 2 late free throws with 4 seconds on the clock. What followed was not the product of a clipboard. It was not the play Stephanie White drew up in the final timeout. And once that fact became public, a conversation that had been simmering beneath the surface of this franchise all season finally broke into the open. The Fever won 78-76. Clark finished with 19 points and 4 three-pointers. But winning did not close the argument. In some respects, winning made it louder. The game itself followed a pattern that has become familiar in Indiana's 2026 campaign. The Fever came out sharp, held Washington to just 29 points in the first half, and carried a 17-point lead into the third quarter. By any standard measure, this was a game under control, a comfortable margin built on a dominant defensive structure. Then came the collapse. The Mystics outscored Indiana 47-35 in the second half, hitting 7 three-pointers after halftime at a 58% clip. The lead evaporated in stages, and by the final minute, Indiana was trailing. Kelsey Mitchell made a fast break layup off a Clark assist with 11 seconds remaining to give Indiana a 1-point edge. Then the Mystics drew a foul, went to the line, and converted both attempts. Washington led by 1 with 4 seconds left. Indiana called timeout. The coaching staff drew up a play. What happened next became the center of a debate that extended well beyond the final buzzer. When analyzing the action out of timeout play that led to Clark's shot, what was apparent from the positioning was Kelsey Mitchell cutting across in front of inbounder Sophie Cunningham. Lexi Hull was coming around to the near side at the baseline. Clark came off a screen set for Hull, getting open on the weak side wing. The play, according to what later emerged publicly, was not designed to end with Clark pulling up from 31 feet. The original option was to get the ball to Kelsey Mitchell. Cunningham adjusted when Mitchell was tightly guarded and found Clark with a precise pass that a Mystics defender barely failed to intercept. Clark caught the ball, set her feet, and fired. The shot was clean. Indiana led with 1.2 seconds remaining and held on. For approximately 24 hours, the story was the shot. Then Sophie Cunningham posted to Instagram. Cunningham posted an animated picture of herself and Clark in the locker room after the game with captions that read, "Didn't follow the plan and won anyway." A speech bubble in the graphic read, "We may have improvised." The post was intended as a joke. Cunningham later clarified that. But before that clarification arrived, the basketball internet had already processed the content at face value, and the reaction reflected a level of frustration with the Indiana Fever coaching staff that had been accumulating for weeks. Fans responded immediately. One post read that if the team truly went rogue on the final play and players were publicly laughing about it, it suggested that the players were as done with the coaching staff as the fans were. Another said simply that the coach had lost the locker room. These were not fringe opinions. They were expressions of something that had been building since the opening weeks of the season. The deeper question, the one that Cunningham's post accelerated but did not create, is whether Stephanie White's system adequately positions Caitlin Clark to succeed in the moments that matter most. That question did not originate with a locker room meme. It originated in specific, documented coaching decisions that analysts and observers had been scrutinizing since May. In what became the most visible early controversy of the 2026 season, White faced criticism for a first-quarter substitution during a 16-point loss to the expansion Portland Fire. With 6:30 left in the opening frame, White substituted out Clark, Lexi Hull, and Aaliyah Boston simultaneously. Indiana was leading at the time. By the end of the quarter, Portland led 29-15. White later characterized the substitutions as standard workload management and nothing out of the ordinary. Fans did not accept that framing. The timing, the players involved, and the resulting collapse were too specific to dismiss as routine rotation management. And this was not a single data point in isolation. It was part of a growing record of decisions that eroded confidence in how the coaching staff was managing its most important asset. Through the first 11 games of the season, Indiana carried a 5-5 record and sat 8th in the WNBA standings, a half game ahead of the expansion Portland Fire. These were not the results a roster built around Clark was expected to produce. The 2025 season had been largely lost to injury. The 2026 campaign was supposed to be a reset, a return to the trajectory that made Indiana one of the league's most discussed franchises. Instead, the Fever entered June mired in inconsistency. Clark's individual numbers were also a source of concern entering the Washington game. She had failed to reach 20 points in 4 consecutive games after a 5-game stretch to open the season in which she exceeded that mark each time. Coming into the Mystics contest, her shooting efficiency had declined noticeably across Indiana's most recent games. The three-point numbers specifically were below what anyone expected from her entering the year. The shooting efficiency questions were real. They existed alongside the coaching questions, and the two were not entirely separate issues. How a player is deployed, in terms of spacing, play design, and usage in critical situations, directly affects the conditions under which she takes her shots. That dynamic surfaced publicly approximately a month earlier, when Clark scored 32 points against Washington, including a game-tying three-pointer in the final seconds, and White's post-game response drew immediate backlash. Fans accused White of downplaying Clark's fourth-quarter performance, which had included 17 of those points. White's comments were described by some as standard coach speak. Others read them as part of a longer pattern of the organization failing to publicly center Clark's contributions appropriately. The conflict between those two interpretations, routine professional communication versus a recurring tendency to understate the team's best player, became one of the defining tensions of the Fever's early 2026 narrative. White herself acknowledged, at various points, the structural difficulty of coaching a player at Clark's level. Scheming around Clark's defensive limitations presents a recurring challenge. Benching Clark in critical moments would theoretically address certain matchup problems, but that carries its own consequences. There is no neutral decision when it comes to managing a player of this profile. That tension became visible on camera in a way that gave the public something concrete to point to. Cameras captured an animated sideline exchange between White and Clark during a loss. The two appeared to have a difference of opinion. White called another player over to replace Clark. Both Clark and White subsequently said publicly there were no real issue between them, but the footage existed, and in a media environment where Clark's every expression is cataloged and analyzed, footage carries weight regardless of what the principals say afterward. Clark addressed the attention directly. She said she did not think she would be as good of a player if she were stoic and straight-faced all the time. She described the fire and passion as part of what makes her who she is. She acknowledged that everything is analyzed and said she accepted that, while noting it comes with significant responsibility. That is the professional answer. It is also not the full accounting. The full accounting includes the structural reality of what the final play against Washington revealed, regardless of how Cunningham characterized her Instagram post afterward. The original play was designed to get the ball to Kelsey Mitchell. Cunningham adjusted when Mitchell was covered and instead delivered the pass to Clark. That adjustment produced a game-winning shot. It also confirmed what Clark's supporters had been arguing all season, that the player most likely to convert in a high-pressure situation was not necessarily the player the coaching staff had designated as the primary option in the designed action. Lexi Hull, speaking publicly the day after the game, confirmed that the Fever improvised on the final play. The team was trying to draw a foul, she said. She credited Clark's basketball intelligence and credited Cunningham's delivery. She noted the play worked. What she did not describe was a scenario in which the coaching staff's original design was primarily responsible for the outcome. The outcome came from two players reading a situation the defense created and responding to it faster than the opposition could correct. The defensive confusion on Washington's end was a contributing factor. The Mystics defender attempted to anticipate the inbound pass and gamble on the interception. That gamble failed. Clark, rather than moving toward the ball to shorten the throw, held her position, recognizing that moving forward would have brought her closer to the remaining defense. The defensive miscommunication left Clark standing in open space from 31 feet. Cunningham made the read. Clark made the shot. The play on the whiteboard was set aside. The broader question this raises is not whether any of this was a problem on that specific night. The Fever won, the shot went in, and the result was the right one. The question is what it suggests about the relationship between the coaching staff's designs and the players' understanding of where the best options exist on the floor. When the player who delivers the defining moment of a game does so by departing from the assigned scheme, that departure warrants examination rather than dismissal. One analyst framed the issue in stark terms, comparing it to coaching a player of Serena Williams' caliber to abandon the serve that made her dominant, taking away the primary weapon because it did not fit the preferred system, then watching that player win anyway when given the chance to use it. That analogy has its limits. White did not remove Clark from the final possession. Clark was on the floor and received the pass from Cunningham, but the underlying point addresses something real. When the designated primary option in a final play is not the player most capable of converting under that specific defensive pressure, there is a misalignment worth addressing, and that misalignment did not surface once. It appeared in the Portland rotation, in the post-game press conference following Clark's 32-point effort, in the sidelines exchange that became a media event, and now in the play design for the most consequential possession of Indiana's season to date. The scrutiny of White's management extends beyond individual game decisions. Earlier in the season, the WNBA issued a formal warning to the Fever over injury reporting practices, a development that drew additional attention to how the organization handles communication around Clark's availability. The league's biggest draw, having her status improperly communicated, generated its own backlash, and it did not improve the perception of the franchise's internal operations. The Fever moved to 6-5 after the Washington win. White described the game winner as an opportunity for Clark to grow her confidence back. That framing, growing confidence back, implies an acknowledgement that something had eroded. White did not elaborate on what specifically had diminished Clark's shooting confidence or what role game management decisions may have played in that erosion. But the framing itself is notable, coming from the head coach of the team. Lexi Hull put the significance of the moment plainly. She described it as one of the biggest moments the team had experienced all season and said she was simply happy to see it go in for Clark specifically. Not just for the win, but for Clark as an individual. That distinction matters. Hull was not only describing a team result, she was describing relief for a specific player who had absorbed a disproportionate share of the franchise's struggles, the external noise, and the weight of expectations that arrived with the 2026 season. The shot from 31 feet quieted some of that noise, temporarily. It did not resolve the structural questions that produced it. The play was designed to get Kelsey Mitchell the ball. Mitchell was covered. Cunningham went to Clark. Clark won the game. And afterward, Cunningham posted a joke to Instagram that was received, whatever her intent, as confirmation of something an entire segment of Indiana's fan base had been arguing for weeks: that in the final moment, the coaching staff's designated option was not the best one on the floor. Cunningham clarified that the post was meant in jest. Several fans, she noted, read too much into it. She went on to defend White, describing the internal dynamics between coaches and players as tight and functional regardless of what the outside noise suggests. That is a legitimate point. Locker room relationships are not fully visible from outside. The public record, post-game quotes, social media posts, on-camera exchanges, provides data without full context. Clark and White have both said publicly that their relationship is intact and that support exists between them. But context and accountability are not mutually exclusive. Teams can maintain internal cohesion and still have unresolved questions about strategic deployment. Players can support their coaches and still operate within play designs that do not optimize the team's best contributors in its highest pressure situations. Those two things coexist in professional sports regularly. What is documentable, without inference or speculation, is the following. The Indiana Fever blew a 17-point lead. The game was decided by a play that departed from the coaching staff's design. The player who made the adjustment did so by finding the team's most dangerous shooter in open space. That shooter converted a 31-foot game winner. And in the 24 hours that followed, the franchise's tactical approach in final possessions became the subject of a documented public debate, including statements from current players, not because of the outcome, but because of what the process revealed. Indiana's second-half defensive collapse against Washington also warrants examination alongside the offensive play design conversation. The Fever held Washington to 29 first-half points. The defensive structure that produced that performance did not hold. The Mystics hit 7 three-pointers in the second half at a 58% rate. The coaching adjustments made at halftime were not sufficient to prevent a team that entered the game significantly below .50 from producing 47 second-half points. That is the other layer of accountability that exists alongside everything else. The final possession was the most dramatic moment, but the conditions that created it, a 17-point lead that became a 1-point deficit, reflect defensive decision-making across an entire half of basketball. The full picture, then, is a franchise with real talent, a player capable of winning games with a single shot from 31 feet, a coaching staff operating under extraordinary scrutiny, and a pattern of decisions that has generated legitimate and documented criticism from fans, analysts, and, whether intentionally or not, from the players on the roster. The shot went in. That matters. It was Clark's first game-winning, go-ahead shot in WNBA history. A performance that broke a stretch of shooting inefficiency and demonstrated what this player is capable of when she has the ball at the moment it counts. But the shot also went in because two players on the floor recognized that the designed play was not going to work and made the right adjustment faster than the defense could recover. That recognition that the best outcome arrived from players operating outside the original scheme is the part of the story that does not disappear with a final score. Indiana is 6-5. The season is not defined yet, but the terms of the debate are clearly established, and they will follow this team into every close game remaining on the schedule. When the Fever trail by 1 with seconds left, the question will not just be whether Clark can make the shot. It will be whether the coaching staff draws up a play that gives her the ball to begin with. That question was not answered on June 8th. It was only made harder to avoid.